Hello, it's Neil Hambly, and I'm very pleased to join you for another festive tech calendar session. So my session is going to be on one of the fundamental certifications from Microsoft that was released in the summer of this year, and it's called the Azure Data Fundamentals, or also known as the DP-900. There's two other fundamentals. There's the Azure Fundamentals that's been around for a little while, and also at the same time when the Data Fundamentals came out, we had the AI Fundamentals. So these are kind of entry-level certifications, quite kind of easy to really obtain the certification once you kind of go through some training on that. And they're good kind of precursor to some of the associate level certifications. We're going to go and quickly look at what those are and cover some details around what the Data Fundamentals is. This is kind of a one-day course if you're going to take it. So we're not going to do the full thing, but I'm going to introduce you to kind of what the exam's about, what it covers, etc. Let me go have a look. And for those who haven't come across me before, my name is Neil Hambly. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer these days mostly. I have my own consultancy, which is a Gold partner around data analytics with kind of the technologies of SQL Server, data analytics, Power BI, etc. But let's go have a look at what we have in store for you today. So let's get the first of these sessions up. So before we do, let's kick off with a quick quote from our kind of esteemed leader of Microsoft these days, Satya. Passion, toil, and training can help you to soar. So anything you do in life, you need to kind of put some passion into that. You need to put some effort behind it as well. And training can definitely help improve your chances of being successful at whatever task you're trying to do. So I focus a lot on these days around the training elements, but also trying to invoke some passion into that as well. Of course, hard work always goes a long way. But we have some stats here at the bottom. We're not going to go into those right now. Let's kind of kick through what we have in front of us. So this is the session agenda. Just kind of outlining what we're covering in this session. It's the Azure Data Fundamentals, so the DP-900 certification. And we're going to cover what the instructor-led and the self-paced Microsoft Learn materials available for you. And then we're going to have a bit of a run through of the objective domain, the OD. So in this case, we have four main groupings of kind of exam questions and kind of different characteristics of that exam. So describing the core data concepts, how to work with relational data on Azure, how to work with non-relational data on Azure, and an analytics workload on Azure. So kind of how do we kind of use those different tools and technologies available to us in the Azure space to perform all this kind of data platform and analytics workloads. Let's go and have a look at what's involved for that. So let me grab the next slide. So if you're not aware about the different Microsoft Azure certifications, they've changed in the last couple of years. They've all gone to role-based type certifications mainly. Most of the old certifications, the MCSAs, etc., are retiring at the end of January 2021. They had a little bit more longer lifespan than, because there's some mostly, I think June, they were due to expire. But we pretty much go another 6 weeks left and then they're gone. So if you're looking at kind of getting certified and kind of trying to get some dedication with your employer or potential future employer to kind of say, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I've got some certifications that can kind of help demonstrate that. But also the learning experience you get by going and undertaking these certifications, I think is the most valuable thing. Getting that knowledge to trying to be able to take the certification and pass it, you're going to learn more things than you would have done probably by kind of just doing your day-to-day job. So it's always going to stretch that learn something every day, learn something new. And I do things differently now than I did a few years ago, and I've been in this field for 20 years. So my career has spanned a large number of different versions on and kind of editions of SQL Server and those technologies associated around data platform. And I say every day I'm learning something new. So let's go have a look at the Azure Data Fundamentals, the one in yellow at the bottom there. And this is the one we're going to focus on, the DP-900. So what's in here? What skills do we measure? So we're going to explore the data concepts, relational, non-relational, and analytics workloads. And there's different Microsoft Learn modules that are made available for you to kind of walk through, try out some experiments, go through some exercises, learn about the content. And you can go a bit more deeper than kind of just scratching the surface on these. But mostly you're going to be describing what these technologies do. You're kind of not expected to go kind of really deep level and detail, but you need to kind of understand what's out there. and that's what you're going to be tested on. So we're going to explore that and give you some details. Now, there is a one-day instructor-led course, which some of the courses like that I teach, and I do teach the DP-900. It's kind of going to help you kind of go through the labs and all the exercises to kind of get through. But I would say if you take self-paced or instructor-led, you're going to get to the end goal where you have enough knowledge to be able to undertake these. And it's a good precursor for some of the associate level data engineer, data scientist, or AI engineer certifications. And we're going to kind of pick on those just at the end of the session here. So let's go have a look at a bit more detail. And before we do go into the content, these are some of the kind of technologies that you would cover in the data fundamentals. So storage, where do I put my data? Is it in blob storage or more of a kind of a hierarchical nature with Azure Data Lake Store, for example? What kind of databases I'm going to use? Is it Azure SQL database, single elastic pool? Is it serverless? Is it hyperscale? Is it maybe a SQL managed instance? Potentially an older version of SQL Server, or using a technology we can't put in a PaaS offering, so platform as a service. We may be using an infrastructure as a service VM with SQL Server. There's also the NoSQL databases such as Cosmos DB. We've got a Gremlin DB in there for graphing. We've got MongoDB variants of that. So there's a number of different models available for the NoSQL. And of course, we have our Spark engines such as HD Insight and Databricks, and other tooling like Microsoft Azure kind of server information that you can kind of put onto different VMs and spin up, like your data science VM, your machine learning service, a ton of different ones where you can put Spark engines as well. We also have open source, so Azure database for PostgreSQL, MariaDB, MySQL. I have a couple of databases, and I've got some MySQL databases back-end in those. Azure Data Factory, integration kind of ETL in the world. Up in the cloud is going to be the Data Factory, and that's kind of grown over the last few years with more and more capabilities. And if you've been watching the recent information, Silence Analytics had a big release a few weeks ago where we had the new studio and the GA of kind of some workspaces there. Go have a look, really cool stuff out there, and I'm going to explore in that myself a little bit more. And then one of my favorite tools, Power BI. So I'm a Power BI consultant as well as a Power BI partner in the UK, and we have consulting clients that we kind of do projects for. Power BI is amazing. I just got the December release where we got the composite models, and oh man, there's going to be so much fun kind of learning about what's new in that release and some of the new capabilities. I look at this product and see what's been released over the last 5 years of its kind of life cycle, and it's an amazing tool. We're going to see more and more about this tool, and it integrates with so many other capabilities here. But that's kind of just one of the technologies you're going to kind of come across in the Azure world. So I touched about Microsoft Learn, and there's a bunch of kind of modules or learning paths, which are a number of modules in them that help you kind of navigate to learn the material you need in order to undertake the certification. Now, they've currently broken down this DP-900 into kind of 4 main core areas, and each one of these has a learning path, as you can see on the screen here, which is really cool. So we've got kind of beginner level, kind of Azure stuff, explore core data concepts, explore relational data in Azure, and explore the non-relational data in Azure as well as looking at modern data warehouse analytics, so Synapse Analytics, Power BI, and there's other tools out there that will kind of do analytics as well. So Cosmos DB has some. Got Azure Data Studio. There's more and more stuff out there. Kind of we can do analytics in notebooks as well, and there's so much support around all these technologies on that. Let's go look into the first one a bit more detailed. So we're breaking down the exam into different areas that we're going to have a percentage of questions that are going to be focused on. So for the 100% of the exam, you're broken down to 4 areas. The first one of those is core data concepts, with a 15 to 20% total question volume is going to be concentrated around those areas. Working with relational data on Azure, working with non-relational data on Azure, and working with analytics workloads are all 25 to 30. So when you kind of combine this up, you're going to get 100% across all of those. It's a shorter exam. It's 60 minutes in time for you to answer questions, and there's about another 30 minutes around that in terms of kind of doing other information and steps. Got less questions than you would have a normal kind of so the 3-hour exams are 210 minutes, 30 minutes for that kind of admin, and 118 minutes for the kind of exam itself. They're usually kind of a lot more questions than you will get for the fundamentals. And of course, the difficulty in those questions are going to be more involved for the associate level than we build for fundamentals. But these are a great way to kind of get to grips with an exam. If you haven't done one for a while, they can be a little bit scary. And I don't particularly like taking exams myself, but I do take a lot of them. I teach people how to pass these as well. So we're going to jump in now and look at these 4 main areas one at a time. I'm just going to cover what's in there. Now, of course, we can't cover detailed information today, but I want to kind of highlight some of the core stuff that you're looking at, and then we can come back and go into more detail, show you going to the Microsoft Learn where you can kind of delve into the details here. So let's start with the core data concepts. So again, 15 to 20% of all questions, and this one has described types of core data workloads with a bunch of kind of subtasks within that. So we're going to see that it's mainly describing what these are. So what's a batch data processing? What's streaming data? What's the difference between those? And what's the characteristics of that relational data? So for batch, we're kind of taking data maybe from Azure Data Store, and we're going to bring it in and process it, a number of files, a number of kind of records at a time. With the streaming, of course, we've got something like an event hub where data is being streamed in from, say, an IoT device or any other kind of streaming data. So, think about Twitter maybe, for example. You've got a feed coming from Twitter. You look at those hashtags and trying to figure out kind of, what is the most important thing that people are talking about right now? What's the hot trend? When we kind of look at the differences of how we kind of process those, we're going to have different architectural layers, different ways we work with those technologies. Azure Data Factory, kind of the streaming analytics jobs, for example, for processing that streaming data. And what's the characteristics of the relational data? What's the fixed data types that we might be looking at, and how does that differ from, say, a non-relational data kind of type of approach? So we're going to describe all those, and that's what we go into in that first describe types of core data workloads. I'm going to show you some reference material later on where you can go and look at the different modules to look into this. Describe data analytics core concepts. So really we're all kind of talking about analytics here. Visualization, Power BI, Synapse Analytics, notebooks that have analytics capabilities in them. You name it, there's a large number here. We're talking about visualization types, different graph types, different visualization kind of. We've got the small multiples now in Power BI in the December release. Awesome. We'll kind of be able to constrain and show that information and tell that story better with some types of visualization. A pie chart can only show you so much. A bar graph is good for certain types of data. But we've got all these different kind of visualizations that we can import into Power BI or use kind of built-in technology approaches with something like SQL Server, reporting services, Power BI, etc. What is the descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, and cognitive? What's all these different analytics techniques? How do we use those? So we're going to just go into more content when we look at those modules and explain what those are and when you'd use one versus another. One of my favorite tools inside of Azure is the Azure Data Factory. It's an amazing tool. We've got data flows in there as well, and kind of doing huge, great kind of transformations and cleansing data and getting that data ready. Data doesn't come clean, pre-packaged, ready to go. It never does. You've always got to do some work. In fact, actually, as probably a data engineer, you'll spend most of your time trying to get that data into the right kind of shape, fitness, kind of cleansed, everything. So you can do that analytics correctly. You can do good data in, good results out. You don't want kind of that bad data going into your reporting system. You're just going to get poor results coming out. So look at the ELT, extract, load, transform, or ETL, extract, transform, load. Kind of which way you're going to approach it, which way you look at it, depends on the technology and what you're trying to do. And then we're going to look at the concepts of data processing. So EDA, so the Azure Data Factory is one way of kind of processing data. We may also use something like processing data from our Azure Data Stores, for example, or blob storage into our data warehouse directly, and we might kind of be using Polybase or some other technology to process that. We may bring it into Power BI and do our cleansing there with Power Query. Lots of cool ways of processing data. So we're going to kind of look at that in more detail in those modules as well. So that's the first two. And then we're going to now describe and look at relational data. This is kind of my world I came from when I first started over 20 plus years ago now in kind of the late 90s as a DBA developer and kind of leading those teams and using SQL Server 657 and then like kind of ASP.NET and then later on reporting services. The world has changed. We have amazing technology in front of us now. And with the Azure cloud technologies, we want to get the right relational data workload, and we want to look at what solutions are available out there. So we're going to identify the right data. What data types work with what kind of relational workloads? What's these tables index views? Why do we use those? What's the importance of those? So having a base knowledge of that is going to be fundamental for you to kind of understand how to build on top of that, get that foundation strong, and then build from there further on to create the right database. Is it going to be a SQL Server database? Is it going to be something I'm going to put in Power BI as a model? Is it going to be a non-SQL database technology such as Cosmos DB? Here's all the relational database services. So we have PaaS, Platform as a Service. We have a SQL database in our managed instance, for example. We have our IaaS, which is SQL Server in a VM. So let's say you want the non-latest version, you want 2012 SQL Server. You can't do that as a PaaS service. You've got to go to a SQL Server in a VM and deploy that version of SQL and manage that instance and all of that workload. SaaS services, so things like Office 365 and kind of things, of those nature, are going to be a software as a service. We're looking at kind of all of the different types of services. So SQL Server, we have serverless, we have managed instances, we have provisions, we have some large database capability with hyperscale, and we have SQL Server in a VM. But then we got the analytics such as Synapse Analytics, and we got some open source with the kind of MySQL and MariaDB, etc. So lots of offerings there, lots of different ones we use, and you just need to be aware which ones are best for which workloads and kind of what relational services are available. So we kind of delve into that, and you'll be asked to describe kind of what those are. So that's the types of questions you're going to get on that. Now, with relational databases, it's not going to stop there. We've got some additional stuff we're going to be quizzing you on. So what kind of management tools are you going to need? How do you provision these services in the first place? Have you used PowerShell, Command Line Interface, CLI, the Azure portal? We have also kind of management APIs, so we can have different kind of SDKs that we can make use of as well. We're going to use maybe ARM templates. We might use the quick start templates available in Azure. We're going to potentially do code through PowerShell or an ARM template. And these are really cool ways of getting stuff up. I did a 5-minute quick start for the SQL Island group earlier this week as kind of their Christmas kind of session. And in 5 minutes, I got SQL Server Logical Server set up with a database. I installed some new tables, put some data in it, and queried it and did some visualizations in less than 5 minutes because we had a 5-minute lightning talk. Really cool. And you can obviously go and do a lot more with SQL Server and combine it with other technologies. So how to work with kind of getting that data in and out of SQL fast using Azure Data Factory or other technologies. What about these additional infrastructure we need to sit around it? So firewalls, virtual networks, connectivity into that with maybe a kind of a private network connection, private endpoint net. We don't want to get any traffic from the internet coming in because that's too much of a security risk. So how do we kind of take all that together? And then what tooling are we going to use? I grew up with kind of the SQL Server Management Studio. Before that, we had a SQL Query. And, we've got Command Line. I really like the Azure Data Studio these days. That's good. And also, I tend to use a bit of Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio itself as well, with all the extensions available. And as well as things like notebooks I can connect to and communicate with my databases with that as well. We're going to also probably do some admin type activities. We're not just running queries all the time. We may need to create structures with our DDL. We may need to run some inserts, updates, deletes with the DML, the manipulation language. So we're going to need to have to way to communicate with that server, get some information in, create structures, kind of put data in and process that data with stored procedures and views, and the list goes on and on. So we need to describe the different query techniques available. And you need to understand what these things are, just at a high level. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but just knowing that there's different language constructs that we need to have and how they kind of flow in there. So you'll be asked to kind of provide some answers as to what's the difference between maybe a DDL and a DML, and what is the difference, what do these things do differently. When I started my career, I wasn't using any NoSQL for many, many years. It's only probably in the last 3 or 4 years I've kind of got into the NoSQL world because I teach it, but also in the technologies and the clients and projects I've worked on. It's been a kind of requirement. Most of the data in the world, probably 70-80% of the data, is in a NoSQL schema at runtime, on demand kind of a type of data. So most of the data you're going to get is going to be non-structured, okay, NoSQL. So we need to understand the non-relational data workloads, the characteristics for that. What's the types of data? So what's a JSON file? Kind of how do we get data in and out? How do we kind of understand how we kind of set those systems up to harness that data, put that data in, query it? What's the right data store to use? Is it a Cosmos DB? Is it going to be Azure Data Lake Store or blob storage? Is it going to be a SQL Server? Going to Synapse Analytics? What are the different types of systems we can put in? And all have pros and cons. We've also got things like table storage, and the list goes on and on and on a little bit kind of to when's best to use one data store, one type of workload than the other. We've got more than one type of kind of store that we can use though. So you might want to use Cosmos DB sometimes, but you can also do the same thing a lot of times with the table storage, blob storage, file storage. You know, what's the analytics I do? Am I just kind of storing this data for later? Do I need to do lots of analytics? Well, the Synapse Analytics Studio that was kind of released a few weeks ago, actually probably only about a few days ago now, is something that's really going to kind of, you know, change the game a little bit for a lot of what kind of the technology approaches we're doing. So the architecture we built. So we need to be mindful of that there's multiple choices here. Sometimes it costs, capability, kind of ease of replication of data around the world. One of those kind of requirements may mean you'll use one technology against another. So non-relational data offerings, there's a number of them there. Check them out, see what comes of that. And we're going to look at some Microsoft Learn and etc. for that. Of course, there's basic management for non-relational SQL Server as well, or non-relational data, I should say. How do we provision, deploy this? Are we going to use something like Azure pipelines to get data in and out of our data systems? Are we going to be using the PowerShell, CLI tools, etc.? So again, figure out kind of the ways you can do different deployments. I like ARM templates. I like the ability to be able to kind of repeat the same thing with putting some data in it, and maybe just changing the virtual kind of resource I'm going to deploy. So I'm going to deploy into development this time. So I'm going to go into the resource group that is going to be the resource group for my development group. I'm going to go into dev test. I'm going to go into production. Again, around that, we've got security, we've got components, we've got things like Azure Active Directory, we've got multi-factor authentication. You name it, kind of you're going to be connecting from a number of different resources. So again, how do we put that all together? That's for non-relational. It's going to be different than it would be for relational. We're probably, again, still talking about VNets and stuff, but the technology, the authentication methods inside that will be different. You may be using tokens in some of these technologies, such as Cosmos DB or Databricks, whereas you're using probably, say, a SQL login for SQL Server and Synapse Analytics. Or maybe you really want to kind of go down the Azure Active Directory integration mode. So there's management tools, basic connectivity, security, all of that kind of sits around that as well. So knowing what's there, know what tools and technologies and how this kind of sits in the larger space, that's going to be what you need to understand to take the questions that are going to be in this area here. I think this is probably my favorite kind of area these days is analytics. Data itself is, we don't just store it for a reason, like, oh, let's put data in a database. We're doing it for a reason, and usually that reason is we want to understand what's happening, and we need that data to kind of, be the process and lifeblood of our business. So we need to understand transactional workloads, analytic workloads, kind of what the differences between those are, what's batch and real time, how do we kind of put data in effectively into, say, SQL Server, how do we put it into, say, Synapse Analytics. The approach we take may be different, may be more efficient, doing different techniques. And when do you kind of determine how big a database is, and when you need to maybe bring it to a data warehouse format as opposed to maybe a kind of a relational database? We're then going to describe the components of that modern data warehouse. So we're using things like Synapse Analytics, and we're looking at kind of Databricks and HD Insight, and maybe SQL Big Data Clusters, BDC. So there's different architectures, different reason. We're kind of talking about SQL pools now and different capabilities around getting data in and processing it and doing analytics. Really cool stuff to kind of then connect with things like Power BI, analysis services, kind of Excel even. So we've got lots of great capabilities to do analytics on this data, which tells us a story that we maybe not had that capability really to be able to do recently, and to kind of these technologies all kind of were kind of able to take those type of workloads, those petabytes of workloads or massive terabytes of workloads. When I started, a few hundred gig was massive. That's probably the biggest we ever saw. Now it's kind of kind of more than a few hundred terabytes. It's in the petabyte range. So some of these technologies are amazing in the amount of data they can crunch and perform the analytics in a very short amount of time. So we're going to describe the components of that and how that all pins together. There's 60 little mini databases, minions, sitting behind the scenes for Synapse Analytics. And then you're spreading that data across all of those, hopefully fairly evenly. And then kind of run that query, and it comes back in that amount of time. It's like, wow. If you've got 60 gigs worth of data, you've literally got a gig on each node. That can be processed in a heartbeat these days. So you've got 600 gig. That's only 210 gigs, and you'll start getting into probably the row store versus column store and these technologies and how they all pin together. So that's kind of where we are with that. I don't want to make this too long a session. I know there's other sessions you want to probably look at as well. And it's Christmas, so we don't have a huge amount of time to waste. We've got all those parties to go to that we're going to have in our own houses with Zoom calls, of course. We're all in tier 3 lockdown, I think, probably at this point. So I do have my whiskey collection and my other drinks behind me. And some of those will start to be opened more frequently over the next week or two. So I'm looking forward to toasting a few of my friends, having a few Zoom drink at parties, and seeing how it all kind of pans out for the next few weeks. But I look forward to doing some in-person events in 2021. And hopefully maybe this festive calendar next year will be something a little bit different than what we have. But this has been awesome to come in, talk to you guys. Now, we've got a few more bits. I realized I had one more slide I needed to put through. So kind of jumping the gun a little bit there. Describing analytics workload, continuing on from the last slide, ingestion of data. So loading that data, pipeline activities, ML ops, getting data into, say, Databricks and loading it and using Databricks kind of at jobs or notebooks to process that data and have that kind of kicked off by, say, an Azure Data Factory trigger, and it steps up a cluster, processes all the data, shuts itself down again, and that pipeline all goes through. That's really cool. I'm seeing more and more of that kind of technology, and I'm helping some of my customers do that as well. And then visualization in Power BI. Who does not want to do that? I know I do. And the capabilities with page entry reporting, interactivity, dashboards, workflows. It's a full-time job trying to keep up with this stuff. I do literally, I'm not joking, spend about 10 to 20 hours a week, depends on my other workloads, training and going through, learn about all the new stuff's happening, all these technologies. And I've got a backlog because I haven't spent enough time doing that. And over the next few weeks, I think I've got a few kind of more hours available because I'm not doing as many customer training events in the latter part of December and early January. I'm going to do a bit of catch up on that stuff. But that's going to be my favorite kind of piece of getting to kind of train myself and kind of keep up with all the technologies there. So for those who, I don't want to do a pitch here, but for those who want to know more about the training offering we have, I have a website and I will kind of have that new release one in later in January. We'll have a brand new website. So I will be telling you more about that on the Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all those technologies. But we do run courses for all the fundamentals. The next one I know for the DP-900 is 12th of February. So I may see you on that one. If not, have a great Christmas. Have an awesome New Year. And cheers. I will see you guys very, very soon. Bye.